During 246 BC to 146 BC, there were two dominant superpowers in the world, the Romans and the Carthaginians. The world just wasn't big enough for the two of them, and so the Punic Wars began. Rome was fighting for complete control of the Mediterranean, and the Carthaginians were fighting for survival. This was to be a war of different styles and ideologies, for the Romans were heavily forced on the army, while the Carthaginians were heavily focused on their navy. The Carthaginians would fight in traditional style using phalangites, while the Romans would fight using their legions. So much rested on who would win these wars. If Rome hadn't won, the U.S. Senate would most likely not be called the Senate. E pluribus unum wouldn't be on the back of our money. Rome would not have been the powerhouse it became, and Jesus would probably not have been born under Roman rule. Latin would not have been the basis of most languages, and Rome law would not have been the basis of our laws today. The First Punic War was fought over small islands in the Mediterranean, specifically Sicily. A group of Italian merchants known as the Marmarites took a city, and then when people fought back, they appealed to Carthage, who helped them out. But when they grew tired of that, they appealed to the Romans to help them to get rid of the Carthaginians. The Romans won victories against the Carthaginians on land, but had trouble when it came to marine warfare. So they quickly constructed themselves a fleet and the corvus, a boat bridge that allowed the Romans to use their superior infantry and allowed them to begin winning battles. The First Punic War was on the most part a string of Roman victories, apart from the early naval battles and a disastrous defeat of the battles of Tunis. The Carthaginians signed a peace treaty where they retreated from Sicily and paid Roman war in end.
The Second Punic War started when Hannibal attacked Saguntum, a colony that was allies with Rome that was on the Carthaginian side of the Ebro River border. The Romans couldn't help because they were dealing with another war, but when it ended, they sent an emissary to the Carthaginians and declared war. Hannibal realized that trying to defend North Africa and his territories in Spain were a lost cause, so he decided to do the impossible and cross the Alps in the beginning of winter, catching the Romans off guard, who had already amassed troops near Lower Italy and what is now France. They had left a small contingency in northern Italy to protect it from any Gaul disturbance. Publius Cornelius Scipio is made aware of Hannibal's plan when skirmishes meet where Rome was headed. The Romans give chase, but Hannibal slips away. Scipio sends the army forward to continue their attacks, but races back towards Rome, seeing what Hannibal was planning to do. Hannibal, against all odds, crosses the Alps and defeats the Romans on the battlefield time and time again. However, he has lost all of his siege equipment and some elephants on the crossing of the Alps, and so because of this, he was unable to defeat the city of Rome and win the war. Hannibal's famous battles included victories like the Battle of Trebia, the Battle of Lake Trasimene, and the Battle of Cannae. He tried to turn Rome's allies against it, but most stayed loyal, and all attempts by Hannibal to receive aid by Carthage had failed. The Roman army, under Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucus, intentionally deprived Hannibal of open battle in Italy for the rest of the war, while making a dip forage for supplies. Rome also had an incredible way of rebuilding its army quickly after decisive defeats by the hand of Hannibal. During this time, Rome had conflicts against Hannibal's brother in Spain and against the Macedonians. Realizing that Hannibal's army was outrunning its supplies lines quickly, Rome took countermeasures against Hannibal's home base in Africa by sea command and stopped the flow of supplies. Hannibal quickly turned back and rushed to home defense, but suffered a defeat in the Battle of Zama. Publius Cornelius Scipio beat the larger force of Hasdrubal in Spain. In the Third Punic War, Carthage suffered raids from its neighbors Numidia because they had no army. Under the terms of the treaty with Rome, such disputes were arbitrated by the Roman Senate. Because Numidia was a favored client state of Rome, Roman rulings were slanted heavily in favor of the Numidians. After some 50 years of this condition, Carthage had managed to discharge its war indemnity to Rome and considered itself no longer bound by the restrictions of the treaty, although Rome believed otherwise. Carthage mustered an army to repel Numidian forces. It immediately lost the war with Numidia and was now in debt to it. This newfound Punic militarism alarmed many Romans. In 149 BC, in an attempt to draw Carthage into open conflict, Rome made a series of escalating demands, one being the near impossible demand that the city be demolished and rebuilt away from the coast deeper into Africa. When the Carthaginians refused this last demand, Rome declared the Third Punic War. Having previously relied on mercenaries to fight their war for them, the Carthaginians were now forced into a more active role in the defense of their city. They made thousands of makeshift weapons in a short time, even using women's hair for catapult strings, and were able to hold off the initial Roman attack. A second offensive under the command of Scipio Aemilius resulted in a 3-year siege before he breached the wall, sacked the city, and systematically burned Carthage to the ground in 146 BC. When the war ended, the remaining 50,000 Carthaginians were sold into slavery by the victors. Carthage was systematically burned for 17 days. The city's buildings were utterly destroyed. The remaining Carthaginian territories were annexed by Rome and replaced to become the Roman province of